Now that being said, I do generally always walk the ground first. You want to be sure that there's nothing that you don't see poking out of the ground that might cause a hazard for the shelter. But in terms of gravel and rocks and ground, this is designed to be deployed on that. Okay. What you see on the side of the shelter, your decon systems, not your 400s, but your 216 and your 600 will have these ports right here, which are laundry chutes. So folks inside that are being deconned can pass or discard PPE or discard clothing through the laundry chutes, get them out of the shelter so they're not cluttering up the way. Down the length of the shelter, on the corners, you'll see double stack ducts. Down the length of the shelter, you'll just see single ducts. On the 216, there's only one, but on the 400, you're going to see 4 of those single ducts. These are just general utility ones. So climate control, electrical cords, anything that you want to pass into the shelter or bring out of the shelter rather than having to snake through doors, they're just for convenience so you can pass things through. Now, all of these have drawstrings on them. The drawstrings help you cinch down on ducts if you're feeding ducks in. It just helps you keep your climate control inside the shelter, moisture, water, things like that outside the shelter. A couple of notes though. I see a lot of folks sometimes try to push these ducts inside because it looks a little bit cleaner. The problem is now if it rains, your water runs down the liner of the shelter, it drips right here and inside your shelter, okay? Keep these guys outside, cinch them down, tighten them up, best solution. What we do on these bottom ones, you'll notice that I've got little white loops all the way down the base beam of the shelter. That's so we can go ahead and cinch these down, and now you've got a place just to kind of loop through and tie these off to, and that ensures that even in high winds, this isn't going to be picked up and blow inside the shelter. Just helps you seal the shelter up nice. Again, probably not so important for your 2 decon shelters, but for your 400s and your C2, that's a nice little tip, okay? Other things at the base of the shelter. You'll notice I've got webbing loops attached to the frame on every single one of my air beams. Those are your ground stake points. Those are where you're going to put stakes through to hold the shelter to the ground. I also, on all corners, have got high wind lines. These are also stake points, but these are 2 different stake points, okay? My ground stakes are designed to hold the shelter to the ground so air doesn't get underneath it and try to lift it up. My high wind lines are designed to prevent deflection in high winds. This is an air inflatable shelter. It's all fabric. There's nothing rigid in here, okay? So if I exceed my wind load, the shelter's going to bend down to the ground, but as soon as that wind load lifts, the shelter's going to snap back up. Nothing's going to bend or break or bow or snap in this shelter. That being said, these are still rated at 65 plus mile per hour winds. So as long as you have this thing anchored down, you're operating in this shelter, no issues whatsoever. Okay? But I do kind of do the foot stomp and the stress. Ground stakes, every single ground stake point, which means every single beam, and then all wind lines, which on this shelter can be your corners. On your 400 and 600, you're going to have some center mount wind lines as well. Okay? Moving down a little bit, all of your shelters have got some degree of windows, screened windows that seal up. They also have these Velcro patches because we've got a bunch of ID panels for you that'll identify the shelter by the shelter's function. You'll see additional ones on the end that'll say entry, exit, male, female, things like that. There's just an assortment of them. They're all kind of standard sizes, so you can adjust as needed to label your shelters as needed. Okay, let's continue around to this side. Any questions anytime, just yell them out. If I look at my door panel, starting top down, again, I've got a Velcro panel for identification signs. I also have some utility vents here that are just going to back away warm and moist air from the shelter. All of my shelters are going to have this modular door panel that sits off. So I've got a door panel right here, but I can also remove this whole end plate. This is also how you connect shelters together. No additional pieces or components or connector sets are needed. You just zip the door off, you butt up the next shelter, the zippers line up, you zip the shelters together, and your shelters are connected. Okay? Additional ID panels. If I look down the door at my floor here, you'll notice I've got a Velcro seam that runs the width of the shelter. The bottom of my faceplate curtains all have Velcro, as do my door panels. So you've got a lot of flexibility to seal this up, to keep one door open, 2 doors open. You'll notice on the 600 where we have a 2-lane or 3-lane functionality, you can close some of those lanes off just by zipping that individual door and Velcroing it to the floor panel at the bottom of the shelter system. Any questions on the outside of the shelter? I think that's about it on the outside. All right, we're not going to walk, bless you, we're not going to walk around to the other side, but obviously we're on the cold side right now, so we're kind of going backwards, but I do want to point out some things inside the shelter. So if you can help me out, let's just remove this door panel for now. Let's open it up so everybody can kind of see it. Okay. So a couple of things that we got as you look at here. So we got our containment burner we talked about. Now this does have a yellow wrap on both the entrance and the exit. It's supposed to help protect the containment burner wall. It's also there to help give visibility. That's why it's yellow. A nice little tip is this does Velcro right here. So if you're handing any sort of electrical lines, water lines, anything like that, you've got some slack. You can actually feed them right underneath this yellow cover. That way people are tripping over any hoses or cords. But also when we add the retainer loop in, we want to be on all four corners of the shelter. When you put in your sub pumps, we have hoses evacuating rainwater out of this. Those are so you can pull those hoses out of the way. Again, no trip points. It just buttons things up a little bit tighter and keeps operations a little bit smoother for you, okay? Curtains. Well, let's start up top. Let's start top there. This guy here is an air distribution plenum, so it's got ports regularly down the length of the shelter. If you're heating or cooling the shelter, it just helps distribute air a little bit more equitably. You'll notice that right now I've got a net coming down to this corner. If I look at the opposite side, I've got another net coming down to the other corner. These are adjustable, so I've got quick clips that hook this guy to the frame. I can unclip it and flip it to the other side of the shelter. There are receiving clips there as well. So it doesn't matter what side your heater or air conditioner goes on, you can flip that thing and just make it work whatever side you're using. They do have drawstrings at the bottom of them, so you can cinch it to both the duct. If you're feeding into one side, seal off the other side. That's going to help you build back pressure, so you're actually getting air out of this, and air is just not leaving the other side of the shelter. I also have integrated LED lights. So we'll look at the harness on the other side. You don't have to hang lights or carry lights separately. The lights are built into the shelter. Curtains. So I've got a center divider curtain, and this will hold true for your Model 600 as well. I've got center divider curtains, and I've got individual shower stalls. Just like the plenum, these are all hooked with quick clips. So if you ever need to drop curtains, if you ever want to reconfigure the shelter, they're all done via quick clips. Now a nice little tip. If you're ever doing that stuff and it's time to reinstall curtains, the easiest, quickest way to do that is not a ladder and a chair or anything like that. Let air out of the frame of the shelter. The frame will become soft, you can walk out, you can pull the shelter down and just pull these clips to you and clip them back in. And then go back to your inflator pump and top the shelter off so it's rigid again. Easiest, quickest way to do any of those conversions.
Question.
Yep.
Does the repair kit come with extra clips? Like say somebody trips and grabs the curtain and breaks it?
The repair kit does not come with extra clips, no. But we can send you a handful of them. Looking down on the curtain, I do have some Velcro seams here and some tabs. We just call these retainer loops. The point for these is so you keep the curtain secure, so if you're in a windy environment, your curtains aren't blowing. However, they're Velcro, so they're break free. So if somebody's walking through here and their foot does hit that, it's not going to trip them. The curtain will just break free, so it's a safe way to keep the curtain stable without creating additional trip points. Okay? Plumbing lines. This particular shelter has got one solution indicated by yellow and one rinse indicated by blue. We've got our entry points on the other side of the shelter, and those were the hoses that you saw extending from the shelter. So as the system is deploying, you can be hooking your water lines up and getting ready to go. And again, I'm working a little bit backwards right now, but in my individual stalls, if you can see my short hand here, you see I've got my quick connection point right here, and I've got some blue wands, and this is my rinse. What we're going to do is when I'm done talking here, like everybody kind of walk through the shelter, but on the solution side, you'll see that it's already pre-plumbed with the surround shower. That surround shower has got 7 outlets in it. I've got an overhead sprayer, and then I've got 3 down either side of the body. Feel the plumbing connector within the curtain because there's some rigid plates behind there, and the reason for those, it keeps those shower heads oriented properly. So when you deploy the shelter, you don't have to go in and try to be sure everything is set the way it should set. They'll deploy in position to spray where they need to spray. You'll also notice that there is a shutoff valve at the top of that surround shower. It's a good idea. You can adjust those guys. If your water inlet's over here, of course, water's going to take the path of least resistance. You close this side down just a little bit. It'll help balance the volume that you're getting out of both sides of that surround shower. Okay. So let's kind of take turns walking through, watch your step on the containment berm. And take a look at your rinse solutions, or take a look at your surround show.
This is cool.
Don't sign up for 6 more years then. Everybody's on TV.
So this is our power supply. And this is what we'll talk about next here. You can hand me that. Thanks, sir.
Cap you just pulled off as a cover.
Yeah, this is just a safety cap. That gasket is really snug when they're new. After you kind of articulate this a couple times, it'll loosen up a little bit, but you can kind of see, they want to be sure that gasket's always rolled on there nice. So that'll be something that we talk about here. All right.
Hey guys, when you're done, come back over here.
Come on over.
Okay, any questions about what you guys saw on the inside of the shelter by way of the plumbing lines, the plumbing fixtures, or how the curtains are set up? How to remove the curtains if you should need to remove the curtains? Any questions at all? Good. So we talked a little bit about the LEDs being pre-hung in the shelter. All the shelters are going to have an LED power supply. In the 216, it's a smaller shelter, not as many lights. It's just this little compact guy right here with the transformers. In the larger shelters, it's going to look like an ammo can, all right? It's going to be orange in color, and it's going to be a poly material, but they'll be labeled 400 or 600. Those are a little bit more robust because they have cooling fans in them as well. But the connectors basically are going to be the same. The 216, you just have this little, I think it's like an 8-pin connector. With the larger ones, you have the larger circular multiple pin connectors. All I need to do is I've got this wiring harness that is pre-attached to the shelter. And remember when we started deploying it, I said this guy kind of will stick out at the bottom corner here. So as soon as you start coming under canopy, somebody can be grabbing this neck right here and they can be plugging it into our LED supply. Now this does have a gasket on it because it is an all-weather type of system. Whenever you take the safety cap off, it's pretty snug, especially the first few times you use the shelter. This will be on there pretty snug. But you want to be sure this little gasket is still in place and that you didn't take it off with the cap. If it stays in the cap, just be sure you put that gasket back on, just like you would with an O-ring with any sort of plumbing fixtures. I'm just going to hook this guy up, and he clicks. And then this doesn't have an on-off button per se. It's just a GFCI plug-in. So when I plug it in, it will illuminate. If for some reason it doesn't illuminate, I can always just hit my test and reset button. Whoa. And there you go. The shelter has lights.
Wow.
It's always that let there be light moment right there.
It's not any type of battery component to this?
No, there's no battery component in this whatsoever. All it is the transformer to step down your voltage from what we're getting out of our outlets to what the LEDs require. They're a really, really low power draw, okay? I am going to point something out about the LEDs. Now, these LEDs are like light bulbs. They're consumables, okay? So we really upgun this shelter. There's a ton of diodes in this for the size of the shelter, and all of them are done this way. But through time, you may see you start getting some diodes that go from kind of bluish to kind of that yellowish, or they may go out entirely. Nothing to worry about. It's just something that's going to happen over time as diodes burn out. But if you ever get to the point where you say, hey, I don't have enough light, or I want to replace my lights or refurbish my lights, all of these are done by Quick Connects. So it's just a line item replaceable unit in the field. My clear vinyl, I just call it a lens, Velcro's off. And my LED strip, there's 2 in each one of these bands, has got a Quick Connect right there. So if you order replacement LED strips for me, I send you the exact strip for this shelter, and it just clips in and replaces one at a time. Takes about 3 minutes. Same way as we did the curtains. You let the air out of the frame, you can pull the frame right down, and you're good to go.
And so that quick connect is for the whole strip, right? So you pull
It's
the
just
whole
for
strip
that
out?
one strip right there. There's 2 strips per band, so 2
Right.
quick connects per band.
Okay.
Okay?
All right.
Down in this corner here, if you can't see it, just take a look or filter
Hey,
it
y'all
through
hold
so
it down.
folks can see it. We've got 3 additional assemblies, okay? Working top down. We've got the bleeder valve for our containment berm. We already addressed that because we opened it up to fill our berm. We closed it off. Pretty self-explanatory. If I take one more step down, if you can point to the black circular item, that black circular valve is our pressure release valve. Now, when we filled the shelter up, I told you that standard inflator doesn't have enough juice to overinflate this shelter. That'll fill this up to about 3.2, 3.3 PSI. Our optimal operating pressure is actually about 3.4, 3.5 PSI. If I'm using compressed air, obviously I'm going to get there. We do have some larger inflation assemblies that will get us there. But as we are, the thing is going to perform exactly how you need it to perform. If, however, you're using a different inflation mechanism, you have no way of knowing when the shelter's full. That pressure release valve is set at the factory. It's 2-stage. It's going to open up at 3.5 PSI. So you'll see a little red ring show up because that pressure release valve has a plunger. That plunger will pop out to stage 1. It'll start evacuating air. That's how you know to shut off your tank, shut off your compressor, shut off whatever other inflation device you may be using if you're not using the standard inflator, because you know the shelter's full. When the pressure of the shelter drops back down to about 3.4 PSI, that valve automatically resets. So you don't have to do anything with it. Just let it open up and vent air until it's happy, and then it will reset itself. It is a 2-stage system, so if you really are forcing air into this shelter and we exceed about 4.0 PSI, that plunger will come almost all the way out, and it will literally be passing air from your inflation valve directly out of the shelter. But second verse, same as the first. As soon as it drops down to about 3.7 PSI, it'll click close to stage 1, 3.5 PSI, it'll click close to completely sealed off. By way of operators, you want to be sure that that pressure release valve is unobstructed. You see people do silly things. One time somebody heard it whistling and they didn't realize that it was actually doing what it was supposed to be doing, so they put duct tape over it. Bad idea. Just be sure that that pressure release valve stays unobstructed so it can be safe and do what it needs to do. Now, that being said, this shelter at 3.2, 3.3 PSI, we test all of these to a 10-to-1 safety factor. So I can actually put about 33 pounds of pressure in this airframe without damaging it. So there's a ton of safety caution built into it and margin built into it. But you want to be sure that you're operating it the right way. That bottom piece, which is a brass connector similar to our push-pull valve, we call that a top-off or a SIP valve. And the design for that is, if you look behind you here on that base beam, see that loop?
Right here?
Yep. The point for that is I've got a retainer loop on my base beam. I can actually put my inflator right on the base beam and I can Velcro it to the base beam. So if I'm going to be up for prolonged operations, I say, hey, I might have some barometric pressure changes, you can put your inflator inside the shelter and hook it to that SIP valve, and that way you don't ever have to dig the inflator out again. If the shelter starts getting a little bit soft, you walk over and flip the switch, you turn it on for 30 seconds, and you turn it off just to top the shelter off. Now, that being said, one of the reasons we use a neoprene for our airframe is it's not going to wick air like vinyl or other conventional types of materials. You're going to get 7-8 days out of the shelter without having to top the shelter off. Where you may see some extremes is where you, usually more up north in the fall or springtime, where you have dramatic, 60-degree swings between night and day, where you're going to see dramatic temperature, barometric pressure changes, where you may see it get softer in the nighttime. You can go ahead and top it off. But if you top it off in the night, don't be alarmed come noon the next day when that pressure release valve opens up to vent some of that air. Perfectly normal, okay? So any questions about the air control valves that we see inside the shelter? I think the only other notes I have, you'll notice throughout the frame of the shelter, we've got these white retainer loops, we've got these metal D-rings. These are all just general utility for you guys. Anything you want to hang from the airframe, go ahead and grab on that ring and pull on that. No, I mean really pull on that. You're not even really pulling on that. Those things are designed as general utility. The frame can sustain an awful lot of weight and an awful lot of burden, okay? So if you have any tracking boards, and not necessarily just for the 216, but like your command and control shelter, any tracking boards, any charts, any equipment, any gear, that's what those hooks are for, okay? So don't be afraid to use them. Don't be afraid to string things up inside the shelter to make it yours and make it functional for what you need it to be, okay? I can't think of any alibis that I got on the 216. Any questions about this guy?
When it comes to the water, how does the suction pump? The suction pump
Sump pump.
Good. So we're going to talk about those items next because that's the kit that we have on the ground right here. Okay. Anything else?
When you inflated it, which one did you say you had to open and close?
This is the one right here. I just call it the feeder line. It's red and it's got this little valve right here. I open it up to feed the containment berm and inflate the containment berm. But once the containment berm is inflated, I'm going to go ahead and close that off for normal operations. And then when it comes time to deflate the shelter, we're going to open the containment berm by its manual valve, which is located on the front right corner here. All our valves are always front right corner.
Just as far as preserving this this shelter for the long run, is there anything we should be aware of when using this just to points to watch out for to kind of keep it in good shape, or is it pretty?
Cleaning it up.
Yeah, so let's hit the accessories, and then we'll talk about the field sustainment and cleaning and some of those other tips. Absolutely, we want to be sure we hit on that. So accessories is pretty straightforward. The 216 comes with a little bit more kit because the 600 we tried to you're going to be integrating a lot of your existing componentry on hand. So the 216 we gave you the elevation grids and we gave you a sump kit. The 600 we didn't have a sump kit with that because you're using your existing pumps with it, okay? But I've got three things here really to show you. So elevation grids. Obviously you don't want folks standing in gray water. Right now you guys probably have those rigid black grids that are probably like 2 feet or 3 feet by like 6 feet or something. It takes like an army to carry them. This guy right here serves the same function. I set it in the front side of my berm. I just undo my Velcro strap and I unroll that guy. I've got a porous material right here and then elevation steps in the middle. So this actually gives you about 1.5 inch rise, and these are your elevation grids. They're pre-measured for the 2 lanes. That's why you got 2 of them. So they go the length of those berms, those 2 shower stalls. Okay, so a lot more compact, a lot easier to handle, just a lot better to transport. I've got a stake kit. I'm pretty sure everybody knows what stakes look like, right?
Yes.
These are my rinse ones. So I got the quick connects inside the shelter. These can stay inside the shelter when you pack the shelter up. They're not going to damage anything. But I think I probably see most users keep these outside the shelter because they might not necessarily want to have these installed every single round. But they have the quick connects, so it's pretty easy to pop those guys in. No issues whatsoever. And then we've got a sump kit. So we put 2 sump pumps with this shelter. So I got this guy, I just call it a puck. It's just a pre-filter. So I got some grain on the bottom. It helps prevent from getting any large sediment pulled up into the sump itself. I've got my hose attachments. So this puck goes inside my containment berm, obviously at the lowest corners. We've got 2 of them, so you got some flexibility as you put the different pucks in there. But if you recall, I showed you the retaining loops on the corners of the containment berms. So this pump can go there. This hose runs over the side of the containment berm, and I can put it right through that little retaining strap, which helps hold it down and helps it keep it from being a tripping hazard. And then we're missing some of the quick connects, but this guy would plug right into my sump pump, and I just got to get those quick connects sent out to you so you snap those right in. I do have an arrow that shows my directional water flow right on this pump. This pump would actually sit outside the containment berm, normally between the containment berm wall and the side wall of the shelter. Out of sight, out of mind. And then I've got a gray water hose that then evacuates that water outside the shelter. You can run that through one of the utility ports to your gray water containments. Now, this is not a mechanical type of system. This is a diaphragm pump. So I do not have a float switch in this. Float switches are not really that reliable because they can get gummed up, they can get gunked up, and then your pump doesn't turn off and on. Additionally, a float switch is just that. It requires something to float in order to turn the pump on. This guy will suck water, it'll suck air, it does not care. It's got a GFCI, so you plug it in, this pump is automatically on. If it sucks air, it just evacuates air out of the system. When it picks up water, it pushes water through the system. It'll run about 6 GPM at about 60 PSI. As a diaphragm type of system though, it's really, really reliable. This guy will run all day long, very few moving parts, really nothing inside of it to break. Another nice part about this being that type of system is when I'm done with the shelter and I want to be sure I've got all the water out of the berm, you know, a 1/4 inch of water doesn't seem like a whole lot, but in that amount of surface area, that's a lot of volume of water. This guy, I can literally walk through like a vacuum cleaner. Any puddles I have, I can just suck up my remaining water to evacuate it to my containment system, okay? So really neat little pump right here.
This won't deadhead anytime since it can suck air, right?
What's that?
It says since, even though it's a diaphragm system, it won't deadhead since
No.
it can suck air.
Correct,
Wow.
correct.
Okay.
So it take two to operate the tent, sir?
You could probably get by with one, but we always tend to upgun it a little bit, which is why we do two with the 216s and higher. Like our smaller ones are just single lane systems, we only do one. But it depends on your consumption inside, and we know that you guys have some larger capacity water heaters. So at 6 GPM, we wanted to be sure we were meeting, any max flow requirements, which is why we did a 2-pump kit.
And then you said a quick connect. In reference to that, what's you don't have them now? Or?
No, they just missed it.
we're not gonna
They
use
normally
them
have
now?
them sitting in a little baggie right here, and they pre-attach this one. Now this is threaded, so I could always remove this and just thread this in.
Okay.
I'm a quick connect kind of guy though, so I'd much rather just get you the female
So
end.
we'll be able to
so-
So it can't operate without the quick connect.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think that's what you were getting at.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like,
Yeah, they're all threaded on there. We just like to put those quick connects, and he put the male one on there. He just didn't throw the female one.
You got
for
a part
this.
number on there? Because I might have to give me some quick connect.
Yeah, we can get you a part number.
go to Home Depot, man.
Between you and I, yeah, you're much better going to Home Depot or Grainger. By the time I touch it, there's like 3 markups on it, and Then we got a freight person who always wants to show profit on
Somebody
anything she
gotta get paid,
ships.
though.
So
he was like, I want to operate this tomorrow. I need quick connects.
yeah, any of the quick connects we use, even with the wands here, these are threaded. We just put the quick connect in there, just because it makes life a little bit easier. So anything can work with thread. We just try to shorten all the setup
By
times. And,
stripping thread, that's why the quick connects is better.
okay. So I think that was everything we had by way of accessories, but you're going to see with the 400s and the 600s, we didn't give you a lot of kit because a lot of your existing water handling is just integrated right with the shelters that we're giving you, okay? But with all of them, you're going to see the inflation pump, you're going to see the LED control box, you're going to see state kits, and then with the 600, we've got a separate curtain assembly because that's convertible between a 2-lane and a 3-lane. So those are the the anomalous things, the odd things we're going to see with the 600. So we'll spend a little bit more time on that once you guys set it up to talk about swapping those curtains out and what it looks like as a 2-lane system and what it looks like as a 3-lane system. Final notes on this in terms of maintenance and field repair and things like that. So our frame is made out of neoprene. The reason we use neoprene, I've hit on this a couple of times, it doesn't wick air. It's really puncture and abrasion resistant. It also does not have wet rot or dry rot. So we've got airframes that have been in the field for 24 plus years because the systems just really, really last. Okay. The frame or the liners are made of a poly nylon material. Everything on the frame, everything on the liner, completely decontaminable. So all of these materials, shelter and Toto, has been immersed in a 10% bleach solution for 24 hours with no material degradation or no performance degradation. So the system is designed for this type of environment. By way of cleaning the system, short of any reagent you may use as decon, that can be used on the shelter. You can use a bleach solution, you can use any sort of degreaser solution. Whatever you want, there's nothing that we have run into that's going to cause any damage to the shelter at all to clean it. Of course, I do say you want to rinse it. You don't want to leave something caustic on it and pack it up and hope that everything is hunky-dory when you come back 6 months later, okay? So you do want to be sure everything is rinsed. Everything with this system is mold and mildew resistant. There's no such thing as mold and mildew proof. So when you do clean the shelter, you want to be sure you give it plenty of time to dry out, okay? You can pack it up wet because it is mold and mildew resistant. However, come 3-4 days, you better be thinking about taking the shelter back out, popping it up, and letting it dry out a little bit. Because if you leave it wet, you are going to see that mold and mildew start to form. If you do end up in that situation where you have mold and mildew, you can use any sort of killer that you would normally use like in a bathroom to get rid of mold and mildew. You will kill the organism, you will kill the smell, but it may leave some stains on the shelter. And that's obviously what we want to avoid to keep this thing as pretty as possible and as functional as possible in the years to come. If you do have some tough stains, like dirt stains, residue stains, and this isn't just a ball joke, you and I got to stick together on that one. It ain't just a ball joke, but those little Mr. Clean erasers are probably one of the best things you can use to get this thing cleaned up with the least amount of effort and elbow grease, okay? So good little tips in terms of things that you use to clean the shelters. One additional note about the neoprene. So you'll notice anytime you use the nylon or any material like that, these creases, we call that material memory. Through time, those creases are going to propagate themselves, and what you can't see now, but if I had a microscope, you could see is it actually starts breaking fibers in that. One of the advantages to the neoprene is the neoprene does not have material memory, which is one of the things that speaks to the longevity of that material and why we use neoprene, because that keeps the frame as strong as it was today. It's going to be that same strength in 20 years because it doesn't have that material neoprene. You don't have the breakdown of those fibers at a microscopic level. Field repair. So currently your systems, if you got to repair those things, it takes hardware, it takes tools, it takes time, and it takes effort, right? This is your field repair kit for this shelter, because there's nothing in this shelter that is rigid. There's nothing that would ever be needed to repair this shelter that even really costs more than a couple of pennies, okay? If you ever end up with any holes in the liner, any scuffs, any abrasions, anything like that you say, hey, I need to patch it, all your patch materials are right inside this Velcro pouch. And what we do with this is these are all standard, so there's all sorts of colors in here. It's all the same material, just different colors, but we got your yellow right here. We even have some of that red mesh for the top of your elevation flooring grids. We've got black material for your floor. This is not your liner, this is your floor, and you can feel the difference because it doesn't feel anything at all like the neoprene, okay? So you got your flooring patches, and then I also have my cement, all right? And this is just called AquaSeal. This tube will dry up long before you ever need to consider using these patches, all right? Hang on to these tubes though, even if they're dried up, because you can get this stuff off of Amazon for like $4. It's a way cheaper and way quicker than trying to come to me. So even hang on to this tube if it's dried up. So if anybody ever needs to order this to do any maintenance work on the shelter, you know exactly what you need, okay? I think it's easiest to patch the liner when the shelter's in the up position because the fabric is nice and taut. I see exactly where the hole is or where the tear is, and I know exactly what size my patch needs to be. I might date myself a little bit, but who's ever patched a bicycle inner tube tire? Only the old guys, all right. Exact same process, okay? Patching is generally easiest done from the inside out because you notice this has a little bit of gloss to it. If you do it from the inside out, you'll get better adhesion with your cement. I would say measure twice, cut once. You don't want square patches, you want circular patches. Squares have corners, corners get torn loose. Circular patch, be sure it's the right size, get at least ½ an inch of overage for any hole or any tear you're gonna patch. Be sure it fits right, go ahead and cement it on. Key with this stuff is it will stick to absolutely everything, okay? So if you're gonna patch it, wear gloves, wear latex gloves. It's a good idea if you're going to be smoothing it out, or if you're like me, not very good at arts and crafts and you know you're gonna spill the stuff, a Ziploc baggie is the only other material that this stuff won't stick to. So I like to use a Ziploc baggie so I can smooth the patch out. I normally get somebody to help me on the other side and hold that fabric in. That way if I have any seepage or any overage of this, it's not getting all over the place. This stuff sets pretty quickly. It'll set in about 15 minutes. It'll cure in about 1 hour. Your shelter will be completely cured and ready to pack in about 3 hours. So it sets really, really quickly, okay? If you ever need to patch the frame, we do have additional neoprene patches on the inside, or on the repair kit that are pre-cut circles for your neoprene patching. Obviously, you can't get inside out to patch the neoprene. So the only difference between patching the liner versus patching the neoprene is we also put in a little piece of fine grit sandpaper. If you ever need to patch this, you just rough it up a little bit with that fine grit sandpaper. It'll help improve the adhesion of the cement, okay? So you just rough it up a little bit, clean the material off, and then go ahead and apply your patch the same way. If you're patching the frame, it's easiest to do that when the shelter is deflated. Find a hard surface, whether it's a sawhorse or a table or whatever the case may be, lay the portion of the frame to be patched, go through the exact same processes, apply your patch. When doing the frame, I like to be sure I don't have any air leaks on there, so I'll actually get something heavy like a brick or a cinder block or just a dead weight plate, something like that. Cement it down, put that Ziploc baggie over the top, and put your weight on it. 3 hours later, come back, remove the brick, remove your Ziploc baggie, you're good to go. Those cases, if I'm patching the frame, I always hook the inflator up to it. I inflate the shelter to be sure that patch holds and I didn't miss any of that perimeter. I generally do a bead all the way around that circle, but you want to be sure that you didn't apply a patch that has a hole in it as well, okay? Again, though, I stress using the Ziploc baggie if you're going to put a weight on top. Otherwise, you put a brick on top of this patch, you come back in 3 hours, you lift your brick up, and your brick is cemented to the shelter. So use that baggie between the two things, okay? One final item in the repair kit is this stuff right here, Terrain. So I talked about your field expedient repair being duct tape on this frame, right? Because duct tape is going to work. It's just not something that you want to be a lasting repair. A few years ago, we found this stuff called Tear-Aid. We thought it would be a good thing to tuck inside the repair kits in case somebody didn't have 100-mile-an-hour tape. It was light tape. What we found out, though, is the stuff adheres instantly, and it adheres pretty darn permanently. So we now treat the Tear-Aid as if it's a permanent fix, just like any of these cemented patches. The cautionary note I have about that Tear-Aid, it operates like tape. You peel the backing off. Be sure you kind of measure twice, cut once with that stuff. Be sure it lines up over your hole, and be sure when you peel that backing off that you're laying it flat, because once that stuff is stuck to the shelter, it ain't coming back off, okay? But the Tear-Aid works really, really well, and it sets instantaneously. So that's an immediate fix that's going to be a lasting fix. Okay? Any questions about the repair kits or how to repair the shelter? If you forget absolutely everything I just talked about, between the repair kits and the instructions in the repair kits and the manual right here, it's all written right there. I just don't like to tell people that because then you don't listen to me when I talk. So, but it's all right in the books and it's all hooked right to the shelter. Okay? Questions? All right. Well, what we're going to do now is, I don't know how we're broken down, if we got squads or sections here, but what we'd like to do is let's have one team move the 400. Let's get it slid off to the side. We've got these other shelters that are palletized. They all operate the exact same way as the 216. They're just a little bit bigger, so they're a little bit heavier. Let's get those pallets broken down, and let's put the 600 down in that corner. That guy's going to be 20 feet wide by 30 feet in length. And then we've got four 400s. Let's do 600, 400, 400, 400, 400, and we'll move the 216 off to the side. And let's get you all kind of broken down, and let's everybody get some opportunity getting some hands-on. Let's deploy all the shelters. Once all the shelters are deployed, we're all going to gather around the 600 to talk about the curtain configurations on the 600 and how we change it from 2-lane to 3-lane. 2 safety or cautionary notes. Number 1, when cutting those pallets, be sure you're cutting the plastic shrink wrap and you're not just digging a blade all the way through the shrink wrap and the cardboard and the shelter, okay? So that's number 1. Be careful when you cut the shrink wrap off to get the shelters unpalletized. Number 2, whenever you're lifting these shelters, there's several lift handles on the bag. They are kind of heavy. If there's a lift handle, that means there was supposed to be a hand on that lift handle to lift the shelter in unison, okay? Bad idea for one person to try to grab that shelter and try to yank that one guy. You know, that 600 is like a 400-plus pound shelter. That handle will give out before it decides to move. So if there's a handle, use the handle, lift in unison, lift using your legs, position the shelter where you need to be. I'm a lazy guy. If I'm on a floor like this, it's a whole lot easier for 2 or 3 guys to roll that shelter than for 6 guys to lift the shelter. So, all right.
Take decon, stay your ass right here.
Take decon.